Welcome, everybody. Okay, so we are here for our talk with John Martin, who's going to be talking to us about the art of tour management, managing bands. We'd love for you to share your week with us. So if you could tag us, tag Confetti with the hashtag IW23 to be in with a chance of winning cash prizes. Don't forget that you can still book onto upcoming events by going to iw.confetti.ac.uk. Make sure you sign in using your Confetti or your NTU addresses. You can also check out previous year's talks and masterclasses on the on-demand section. In case of an emergency, please be aware of the evacuation points in Metronome. In the event of a fire alarm, please make your way to the nearest fire exit and go to the corner of Brook Street, which is to the right of the main exit. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to welcome John. Can we have a round of applause, please?
Welcome, John. Welcome to Metronome, the fine facility that we've got here. Are you impressed with what you've seen so far?
Yes.
It's brilliant.
Oh, sorry.
Use the mic if you can.
Yes.
Yeah, brilliant.
Yes.
Okay, let's start. This is the glaringly obvious question, but it's worth doing. What does a tour manager do?
Right, okay. You are in charge of the running of the tour, not on your own. On a bigger tour, there'll be a production manager who deals with the technical side. There'll be a tour accountant. There are people to take care of the wardrobe. There's the road crew. There are riggers. There are lighting people. But it is your job to organise the tour, to make sure all those moving parts fit together properly, to make sure the band makes some money, to make sure that all the shows go right. You know, it's as simple as that.
So you're dealing with all of these heads of wardrobe, all of those, as well as presumably the artist as well.
Yes.
So where do the problems generally occur, if there are any?
Well, sometimes it's the artists. Sometimes it's the promoters. Sometimes it's the local authorities. Sometimes it's things you never even imagined would be a problem. Every day is different. You have to be adaptable. You have to be a sort of combination of a number of things. An accountant, a psychologist, a bit of a cheerleader at times, somebody's confidant if they've got a problem, travel agent, and occasionally a bit of a miracle worker. And it's all those things, I guess.
I have to say, because I've interviewed hundreds, thousands, probably thousands of bands at venues or at the BBC, and whenever there's a tour manager, I always think two things. One, you've got the best job in the world because you're working with these incredible people. And two, you've got the worst job in the world because you're having to get these people organised. So is it the best job in the world or the worst job in the world?
It can be. There has been times when it's been the best job in the world. There have been times when it's been absolutely the worst job in the world. I mean, like I say, every day is different. Every day is different.
Can you give me an example of a time when you thought it was the best job in the world? What springs to mind, one of those pinch-me moments?
There's been a few occasions. Actually, I suppose one of them, it's not the biggest artist I've ever worked with, was Mark Ronson. Because when I started working with him, which was when the Version album had just come out, Amy Winehouse had one hit, I guess. And he was signed to Sony in the UK, but there was no money. He was sleeping at his dad's. They couldn't even, the record company wouldn't even book a hotel for him. And we went to do a show in Manchester at, I can't remember that, I think it's the Day and Night Cafe, it's called. Holds about 300 people. No money in the budget, so we literally went up on a coach with the gear in the back of the bus and came back straight afterwards, arrived back at Hammersmith Apollo at, I don't know, 6 o'clock in the morning or something. And a year later, we headlined Global Gathering to 65,000 people. So that's a high point, because it's great when you're working with somebody like that and they just get a lot of success, and he's a great guy to work for. So
we have some footage of Mark Ronson. This is from 2008, actually. I'm not sure this will be Global Gathering, but let's have a look.
So by 21, you came for.
That's Glastonbury.
So that's not just Glastonbury, I think it's the pyramid stage, isn't it, as well?
No, it's the other stage.
Oh, was it? Oh,
Yeah.
Good
No,
stuff.
yeah.
And would you have been with him at that time?
Yeah.
Okay, so what was that day like?
It was great because I'm not a big fan of Glastonbury. In fact, I don't know many tour managers who are.
I'll ask you about that in a minute, but we'll stick with Mark Ronson for now.
Contentious.
Okay, I'm still
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of Glastonbury, and not many tour managers are. It can be a little bit of a problem working there. The year before, it was very wet, very rainy, and we had a lot of problems with the organisation. After the hits came, they couldn't have done more for us. Right. So, but yeah, I mean, I remember that, and I remember I sacked the production manager the next day, but for a completely unrelated reason that we're not going to go into. But yeah, it was Lily Allen got up and sang. I think, yeah, and somebody else, can't remember who.
So I'm trying to get my head around. You arrive at Glastonbury, presumably on a tour bus.
Yeah.
You get taken to the other stage in this case with Mark and with was Amy on your bus with you as well?
No,
okay.
Amy only ever did one show with us.
Okay, right.
Which was at the Brits.
Okay.
Yeah, we arrive on the bus, go to the dressing room. The crew have been there for a while, setting up.
Is it the crew that you know that set up?
Oh yeah,
okay.
It's
you see, that's interesting because I'd rather
carrying...
naively assumed that at Glastonbury the stage would have the same crew all day, but that's not the case.
Well, the stage hands are the same crew, and the PA crew, the techs, but then we've got monitor engineer, front of house engineer, lighting designer who didn't really have to do much as it was like 5 o'clock in the afternoon, 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Backline crew. There was a girl doing wardrobe.
But you're still across all of this?
Well, sort of, yeah. Although the hope is that you're actually working with people who know what they're doing as well. So, yeah, I mean, that was a high point because there were a lot of good people on the tour. I mean, it could also be a bit of a problem because the year before when we played festivals, we were playing at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And because there were so many people in the band, there was like 8 musicians and then 5 or 6 guest singers. We used to bring our own mixing desk, front of house mixing desk, and monitor desk, because you'd never, the changeover between acts is 20 minutes, you'd never do it. So that's fine. So you take the mixing desk out to the front of house position, but then of course you can't get it back until the end of the night. So you go on at 2:30 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, play for 15 minutes, and then all the musicians have nothing to do for 10 hours.
Yeah.
So they all disappear. They all go and have a drink. They go, And a lot of that summer, I was in the dance tent at 2 o'clock in the morning trying to find somebody so we could actually leave. So.
Because this is the other aspect of tour managing that I see a lot. And just 2 weeks ago at the BBC, we had a band called the Murder Captain, who are a great band, really good band, but very live-wired, very spirited. And they came in with a tour manager who spent the whole... I was recording 2 tracks with them at the BBC.
Right.
It took quite a long time, so he was constantly going to find... One of them was in the toilet, one of them had gone to chat to someone in the office. And he said it's like herding squirrels.
Yes.
Can you relate to that?
Yeah, I can. Sometimes, not always. I've worked with some other bands who've been incredibly organised. Would be there on time, would sit and do interviews, so it's different bands, it depends. Some people have a short attention span and they'll just wander off. Sometimes they'll wander off just to annoy you.
On purpose?
Oh, yeah. Oh. You're not necessarily Mr. Popular as a tour manager. If you wanted to be popular, you'd be doing something else.
Oh, is that right?
Well, because
you hold the purse strings.
You've got to get people to do things they don't necessarily want to do. Okay. Sometimes early in the morning, and sometimes we've got to leave, at 2 o'clock in the morning to get to the next place, like I say on the Mark Ronson tour. So, Occasionally, yeah, it's not all. Yeah.
You've given me one pinch yourself moment there. That's such a good story. We've got a lot out of that with Mark Ronson. So give me another one as well. We'll do 2 pinch yourself moments today.
Okay.
Should I throw some names at you here?
There are a few, but I'm trying to think of. I mean, I suppose the other pinch yourself moment. I mean, you know, tours can be good to start off with, and they can halfway through they can become a little tiresome. By the end, you're just glad to get home and never see these people again. You know, so. Other pinch yourself moments probably involve individual musicians. I did a show at the Royal Albert Hall in 1992. There was a general election, and the Natural Law Party, which was a political party formed by people who practice transcendental meditation and yogic flying,
right,
or not. We're raising funds, I mean, to hopefully get some MPs standing, I mean, obviously. So George Harrison was going to play a show at the Albert Hall. And I, at the time, was tour managing a guitarist called Gary Moore, who lived quite close to him, and they were friends. And George Harrison had toured, just prior to this, had toured Japan with Eric Clapton's band, but had fallen out with Eric Clapton's because they had shared a wife at one point or another. So anyway, it's all very dull.
You say that.
So Gary came, stood in and played the guitar, and I got asked to sort of tour manage the whole thing. Harvey Goldsmith was promoting it. And it all went very well. And at the end of the night, I walked George Harrison and his son down to the back door of the Royal Albert Hall. And quite spontaneously, he turned around and hugged me. And all I could think is, I'm being hugged by one of the fucking Beatles. So
that is amazing.
Yeah.
That is, yeah, that would be a pinch yourself moment for anybody. That's incredible. That is. It sounds, you know, you get to see the world's doing this, don't you?
Yeah.
I mean, you've been to practically all of the continents except the Arctic and Antarctic, I imagine, haven't you?
Pretty much, yeah. Pretty much. I mean, although actually sometimes you don't. I mean, you see the venue, you see a horrible hotel, you occasionally see a very nice hotel, you see an airport. On a day off, you're probably doing accounts or phoning up the next set of promoters, or thinking about the next leg of the tour. So I mean, it's not all like that, but it's, you know, occasionally you don't get much chance to see. You know, you don't get that many days off where you can do a bit of sightseeing or whatever.
It does sound, however, very exciting to me. It does sound like an exciting life.
Yes.
No 2 days are the same.
No 2 days are the same.
Yeah.
And it can be very challenging, and it's, yeah, but that's what's great about it. Well, no 2 days are the same, but actually the net result of that day has to be the same, because what you're there for is the show. You know, the band as well, everybody's there for the show and for the audience, and to put on, so regardless of the circumstances, you know, you're there creating the same environment every day for a band to put on a show, whether it's in a club or whether it's an arena with lots of lights and video and, you know, an expensive production.
So you can have a horrendous day with all sorts of things going wrong, band members going missing, but by the time the show starts, everything needs to be there. The audience need to not know that it's been a terrible day.
Well, no, how would they?
Yeah, well, exactly. Well, because you.
But also, and it's not just the tour manager; it's everybody on the crew. Everybody, from the caterers to the truck drivers to the bus drivers, everybody puts something in to make it work. And actually, sometimes it's, you know, you can have a really dreadful day, but the band will go on stage and you walk into the audience and watch the first song and just think, this is all worth it.
Yeah.
Because I got into this because I like music. I think now, I know some tour managers who I couldn't possibly talk about who think this is some sort of lifestyle choice and it's all about the private planes and the red carpet and the stuff like that. It's actually about hard work and being very, very organised. But it's very satisfying, you know. And sometimes you get to work with people whose music you bought when you were a kid, or whose music you like, and other times you get to people that you work with people you'd rather forget.
I can imagine. Now, there will be an opportunity to ask questions, of course, at the end of this session. So if you're sitting there and any thoughts are popping up in your head, store them there for me, and we'll come back to you towards the end, but there'll be plenty of time to ask John some questions later. I guess if I was sitting there, the number one question now would be, this sounds like a very exciting job. With all its pitfalls, it still sounds very exciting. So how on earth did you get to do this job?
Completely by accident, actually. I went to art college and became the social secretary at an art college in Exeter in Devonshire. And towards the end of the third year, I was doing graphic design because I actually wanted to, I realised I'd have to try and make a living at this. So I did what fine art students disparagingly call commercial art. And towards the end of it, I sort of realised that it wasn't going that well. Could well end up living in Devon for the rest of my life and designing restaurant menus and brochures for caravan parks or something. So I thought, but as a social secretary, you used to get an annual trip up to London to see all the agents, who were probably not much older than I was at the time, who'd been social secretaries at their colleges or universities. So I began to think about maybe I should, I was interested in working in the music industry. I couldn't play an instrument, so I thought the best thing to do was to hang around people who could. So I just answered an ad, and I went and worked at a place called GAF Agency, who represented a number of acts, including the Faces, and that agency got closed down, and I went to work at MAM with Barry Dickens, who I believe came here last year, and whose brother is coming here, Rob,
on Friday.
Yeah. And I sort of wasn't really up to it and blagged it a bit, and then I ended up at Chrysalis Agency, and I was there for 3.5 years, in the period between representing Gentle Giant and Jethro Tull and people like that to representing the Sex Pistols and Generation X and the Jam, so the start of punk rock. And one of the bands a band that I brought to the agency was the Boomtown Rats, who'd been successful. They'd had 4 hit singles, and the agents, my bosses at the agency wanted them to sign an agency contract, and they didn't want to because that would tie them into being represented by that agency. So they said to me, do you want to come and work for us? Be the agent for everywhere apart from America and help with the management, do the day-to-day organisation of photo sessions and stuff like that. So I said yes. So I went there. I worked there for 18 months. And then the day before they were due to go to America, the tour manager at the time, who's still a friend of mine, resigned and decided had enough for all sorts of reasons.
So you've got the Boomtown Rats about to go on a tour.
About to go on a tour to America. Yeah. I had a visa because it was much easier. Everybody had been, we'd applied for visas for everybody. And literally I got phoned up on a Saturday night and said, do you want to come and tour manage the tour? They didn't want an American to do it. And I mean, I'd been on the road with them because I was the agent, but the next day I was on a flight to Atlanta, and that was it. So I did it for 8 or 9 weeks, and then the tour manager decided he wanted his job back, so I came back to England, and I thought, do I want to stay here, or do I? So that was it. It was completely by chance.
You mentioned the agents there, is that a kind of a natural stepping stone to tour management? That was just a pure fluke, yeah?
Yeah, pure, yeah. No, it's not really. Not really.
Are there any steps? If one of our students wanted to be a tour manager, what should they be doing now? Where should they be looking to achieve this?
I guess in some cases, the band of your mates. I mean, it's a bit like sometimes bands' managers. It's 5 guys who can play instruments and 1 who can't. So he, so he becomes the manager or you know, the tour manager, or it's somebody's friend who's got a van. You know, it can be anything like that. I think, and some, I mean, I know tour managers who started out being guitar techs, or, you know, and there is no real way into it. I think, I mean, if you want to do it, you have to phone up management companies, contact other tour managers, talk to promoters. You've got to get some experience. You've got to, it's on-the-job training is the thing. There's lots of things that people study here where you get taught, but you can't teach tour management. I mean, you can tell people what's involved, they can understand what the job entails, but on-the-job training is how you do it, because it's all about dealing with people a lot of the time. And that, you know, the skill of making people do what they don't want to a lot of the time, you know.
It all sounds remarkable. I'm going to choose one of the artists you've worked with. We've got loads here to go at, actually. So I'm going to start at the top of my little list here. Echo and the Bunnymen from 1984.
No.
Against your will, through the thick and thin, you wait until you give yourself to him.
They're still regarded as one of the best live bands in the country now, aren't they?
Yeah, I'd left by then.
Had you? Okay.
Yeah.
So when were you working with them? Was
it was the second tour management job I got. So I came back from doing the Beam Tour Rats, and somehow managed to. Somebody told me to find out Bill Drummond, who was their manager, after a while. And I went to meet him and his partner Dave Balfe in a cafe around the corner from Warner Brothers when it was off Oxford Street, and they just said, "Oh yeah, you could do it." So I'd done a tour. I think everybody who'd done it beforehand. They were being tour managed by the guy who owned the PA, and it wasn't going terribly well.
Right.
So it was just a case, well, you've got some experience. You've at least done a tour. So I did it for a year, pretty much.
So how do you get a tour? Are you just sitting at home one evening, phone rings, and a band's management ring and say, could you nip off to Europe with this particular band, or how does it work?
I mean, some of it's word of mouth, some of it's reputational, some of it's friends who go, oh, so-and-so's looking for a tour manager. Sometimes it can be any number of different things. I mean, sometimes you work with the same management company, so you've worked with 2 or 3 of their bands. And other times you just have to let people know you're looking for a job. I mean, you know, everybody went on tour last year because after 2 years of COVID, lots of people went on tour to make money because lots of bands rely on their live income. And I'm not talking club bands necessarily, but arena bands because of streaming and the way income streams are. And last year, it was very busy. So at the beginning of this year, there would probably be more tours if it hadn't been everybody went out last year. So I know 3 or 4 tour managers who aren't working at the moment, you know, including me. Although I've got some things that will be happening in the end of the year, or middle of the year to the end of the year. But
so you can go for weeks or even months without work?
You can do.
Okay, yeah.
You can do. I mean, and you can just come back it can be at the wrong time. I mean, I did, not as a tour manager, as the road manager for the band, and bizarrely also the stage manager, 2 entirely different jobs for Wham in 1985 when they played stadiums in America. I mean, I think
that's an exciting thing to be able to say.
No, yeah, it's exciting, but when I think about what I was being paid now and the job, I mean, literally, you go to the gig, load in, do a show, take the band, not George and Andrew, but take the band back to their hotel, get them up the next day, get them to the airport, check them in, get them on a flight, get them in the hotel in the next city, and then go back to unload the plane, which is full of equipment. I hardly got any sleep at all for like 3 weeks. But then at the end of it, the tour manager, who's a friend of mine, had to go back to England, and they were going to do some recording. So he said, can you hang on and just look after the band and George and Andrew while they're recording in New York? So I did, came back, phoned up a friend of mine, and he said, I didn't know where you were. I was looking for you to do Terence Trent D'Arby,
Right.
but I didn't get it. I mean, you know.
And that would have been a longer tour, would it?
That would have been a longer tour.
Is that what you're after? You're just after the longest tours?
Not necessarily, because the longest tours can be, the longest tours can be grueling.
Yeah.
And
you don't get to see home, do you, I guess?
Yeah, you don't see home. I mean, I did an In Excess tour when I was home for 3 days in about 10 months.
Wow.
So, you know, that's, and actually that 3 days, we were playing Wembley, and we were in Wembley Arena, and I came home, and my ex-wife, who's, well, now my ex-wife, but my wife, after the phone started ringing, as soon as I got home, my son was about 2. As soon as I got home, the phone started ringing, my mobile started ringing, the house phone started ringing, and eventually just go to the hotel and we'll come and see you there, because it was just, you know, so you can, you know, long tours can be fine and you make a lot of money probably, but it's hard, you know, at the end of it, it's hard work.
Yeah, especially if you've got a family at home.
Yeah.
We mentioned in excess there, I've got a clip here from 1981. Would that be your era? Or
No,
not?
no.
Okay, we'll hit one of them eventually.
1997.
1990s. Oh, okay, so much later. Well, let's see them anyway. 'Cause they're great.
I was standing, you were there, 2 miles collided, and they never tear us apart.
So by 1997, they were huge bands.
Well, yes, that's Wembley Stadium, 1991.
Yeah.
It's funny how sometimes when you see clips, don't ask me why this is, but sometimes when you see a clip of something, you can recognise, you can sort of remember where it was because of what they were wearing.
Really?
That was particularly true of Spandau Ballet, but that's a different.
Yeah.
You know. Anyway.
But then you're working with the wardrobe people, aren't you? So
No, not really. You just remember some of the more ludicrous things people wore. But that, no, by 1997, they'd sort of split up and got back together again. And so that was the last tour.
Yeah.
And, yeah, people weren't terribly happy for different reasons. People didn't, I think, you know, it was... They got back together, they made a record, it didn't do quite as well as it had done. We were still playing arenas and still playing big outdoor shows, but it wasn't quite the same. So, you know.
It's interesting. Do you ever get starstruck? I mean, you mentioned the George Harrison incident earlier, but when you're working with bands on a regular basis, when you first meet them, do you think, oh my goodness, I'm going to be working with whoever?
No, I mean, I don't want to sound sort of flippant or about it, but no, you don't. You can't afford to be, really. You're not doing your job very well if you're going to, you know, fanboy them all the time. So, no, I don't think I do. I mean, I've worked with some people who I admire a lot and met some people who I admire, but you're not there. You're there to do a specific job, and they expect you to do it. You're there to, you know, run the tour.
You're not there to be their mate.
No, you can be their mate in some ways. But, you know, you can't be, you know, the people who become their mates don't last very long.
That's interesting.
I don't think. Because, sometimes you have to be the bearer of bad news. Sometimes you have to, you know, you can't spend all your time. They've got enough mates, trust me. They've got enough people in record companies and promoters and hangers-on and God knows who else who will tell them they're just fantastic all the time. So... You know.
You don't need to do that. No.
Well, sometimes you do.
Right, let's go to this, and again, this is another artist you've worked with. This clip's from 1983. It's Madness.
Our house in the middle of a street. Our house in the middle
They look like they'd be fun to work with.
Yes, they were.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were. They were great to work with. I worked with them for from the end of 1982 to early 1984.
Okay, quite a stretch.
Yeah. And also when that single was very big in America, so we went to America and we played lots of shows they played lots of shows on their own. Our house was in the American charts, but we also supported David Bowie, supported the Police. We supported David Bowie at a couple of 2 shows, and the Police at about 3 shows. And that was great.
And as well as tour managing them through venues, you'll be doing things like media appearances, will you, as well, take them to TV and radio and that kind of thing, yeah? I mean, how is that? Is that require a different set of skills to managing the tour?
It requires a different set of skills, and occasionally, things are a bit different now, but occasionally you'll be there to sort of monitor what they're being asked. Not necessarily by the people in the TV studio, but things that the record company would want them to do that they just won't want to do.
Right.
And you're there to, if they don't want to do something, or if they don't want to answer a certain question or stuff like that, then it's you going, I'd rather you not answer that. I'd rather you not ask that question.
So you intervene in the interview?
Because you're there you work for them. That's the other thing. You don't work for the management, you don't work for the record company, you work for the artist.
That's interesting. Do you know, I hadn't even thought of that. That's interesting.
You don't often want to tell the management that, because they obviously think you work for them. But, you actually work for the artist. Everybody works for the artist.
So you might have their manager on the phone in the morning saying, they're going to do this interview later. Try to avoid, don't let them ask them about this. Or make sure they talk about this. Or,
I don't know whether I can... Oh, God. This could be a little tricky. No, actually, I don't really care. So when I first worked with Spandau Ballet, Steve Dagger, their manager, who still manages they don't exist anymore, but manages Gary and Martin Kemp, and they did something very clever very early on, which just after they signed to Chrysalis Records, their lawyer Brian Carr said to Steve, you should do your own publishing. And Steve, who tells this story much better than I will, Steve was like, Jesus, something else I've got to learn about. But they own their own publishing.
Right.
Which is what they had a big court case about the shares. But early on, and I'd met Steve in the Mayflower Hotel in New York, and we'd gone to a club, and just we'd gone to some club and literally left it the following morning with people walking past going to work. I mean, and so we became friends. So, and eventually when he needed a tour manager who'd actually done it before, I did it. But the first thing he said to me is, never let Tony do an interview on his own.
Can I ask why?
There's a documentary called Soul Boys of the Music of the Western World, which they put out in 2014 when they reformed again. And it was financed mainly by Steve and Gary. But the band got together, reformed, and played, and we did quite a long tour. Went to America, went to Australia, went to the Far East. And there's a bit in it which is a better way of explaining it. They're being interviewed in Los Angeles by a DJ called Richard Blade from K-Rock, who says, are you going to Japan? And Tony Hadley goes, well, we haven't sold a lot of records there, so we're probably not going to. And Gary says, no, you can't say that. Now, this wasn't in the interview, but when they got all the footage together for the film, they got all these offcuts and all these things where, that's why Tony wasn't allowed to do interviews on his own.
Right, a bit too honest in some ways. Deprecating?
No, not deprecating. That's too subtle for him.
Okay.
And honest, no, just didn't get.
Okay. The PR aspect.
The PR aspect.
Got it.
Of things.
Yeah, I've got it. Yeah.
So,
so for you, your nerves must be on edge because you're told this person must not do an interview on their own. So you've got to be...
but you just go, if you want to do this one with,
Right.
John, or John
Okay.
Keeble was always great because he was funny.
Yeah.
He was always funny. He's very sharp and very witty.
Right.
So you're often told that. Don't let so and so do an interview on their own, or don't let them talk about this.
I'm learning here because when I go to do interviews,
yeah.
they'll go, "Oh, you have him and her." They're just like
yeah.
Now I shall view
No,
this
I
in a
want to
different
talk
light.
to
now.
this one. No.
Yeah. Well, I'm learning. We've got some Spandau Ballet, circa 1986. This is the NEC, I think. This one. Now, a coincidental question is: if you're managing bands that have got internal tensions, is that tricky for you? If the members of the band aren't getting on so well, do you have to be a bit of a referee?
Yeah. Sometimes. Sometimes sometimes you do, and sometimes you just step away from it purely because they're not going to. I mean, the thing is, there's something. I've never worked for the Rolling Stones, but there's something which I've heard lots of people say about them is, you can't. There's Mick and there's Keith. You can't take one side, and you must never get in the middle of it.
Right.
Even if they're arguing about something, if you get in the middle of it, they'll just both turn on you. And that's sort of the case with a lot of, sometimes the internal problems are things that you don't know the full details of and you don't really want to. I did once have to part some people who were trying to punch the shit out of each other before a show. But, most of the time you try not to get involved. You have to be, you can't sort of take sides. You can't be, you are...
You have to be a diplomat.
Yes, and you've got it. You owe it to each member of the band to do the best job you can, doing what you're employed to do. So,
I said earlier that it sounds
however annoying they can be on occasion.
I said earlier that it sounds like it's the best and the worst job in the world. We've done lots of the bests. Is there a moment that stands out in your mind when you thought, I don't want to do this anymore?
No, there's been some moments which were not great moments, but, moments which were, the worst bits of my career, probably. I mean, the most notable one is In Excess, when Michael Hutchins died. That was... Because you can't... I mean, I actually was quite... sorry, I'm forgetting the mic. I actually was quite friendly with him because I'd known him for... I did a tour with Public Image supporting them in America and got to know him, and we had mutual friends in London, so I'd met him a few times. And when I started working for them, touring with them, we got on pretty well. And that was a pretty fraught situation, that tour. But, it's not... It's a bit careless to have somebody kill themselves on a tour. And that's what happened. He killed himself for all sorts of reasons, which I wouldn't particularly want to go into. But he was obviously unhappy. And he'd been with the other guys in the band for 20 years, and it was a surprise to everybody because nobody imagined that would happen. So, that's difficult.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine anything worse than that. Right, you mentioned Public Image Limited there, though.
Yes.
Can we cue the Hill clip, please, if you've got it there?
I could be wrong, I could be right. I could be black, I could be white. I could be right, I could be wrong. I could be black, I could be white. They put a hot wire to my head 'cause of the things I didn't say, and made these feelings go away. Model citizen in every way.
How were they to work with?
They were great. I really got on well with John. I mean, I did 5 tours with them, and the 5th one was definitely the last one. But I mean, I didn't walk off the tour. But I just decided I'm not going to do this again because he can be an interesting bunch of blokes. But I enjoyed working with them.
Because, of course, from the era of the Sex Pistols, they've got this. He got this reputation of being unmanageable. But you're saying by the time this era occurred, it was different.
He's got a very definite idea about what he wants to do, but he's very funny. He can be very funny. I think he's changed quite a lot. His wife's very ill, and I haven't seen him for a long time. But, I mean, yeah, he's very funny. He's very bright. He won't put up with any shit from anybody. But they were a great band. They used to, when I first worked with them, they used to play Kashmir by Led Zeppelin as a sort of opening act, but he wouldn't sing it because he thought the words were shit. But so they just did it as an instrumental, and then he'd come out and he's got a lyric book. Right. Because he can't remember the lyrics. So he'd have a music stand, and he'd come out and put the lyric book out, and he'd just stand there with his arms crossed while they played Kashmir, which was... But, yeah, they were, I enjoyed working with them.
You've got to admire the principle in a way, haven't you, really? I mean, it sounds like you've got huge amounts of responsibility. If there's one word that's coming to the fore here, it's responsibility. The book stops with you, doesn't it, in many, many ways?
Yes, to an extent. Even if it doesn't stop with you, it stops with you on the road. Yeah. You know, everybody will look at you and go, what are we going to do now? Shall we cancel this show? Shall we? Yeah, I mean, it does.
Can you give me an example of when you've had to make a really difficult decision because of that level of responsibility? A tough call?
I can think of one thing I did, but it's not related entirely to tour management. Right. But quite a difficult decision, and that was, I worked on, at the end of the 80s, the beginning of the 90s, I worked on quite a lot of big shows, like the Nelson Mandela show when he was still in prison at Wembley, and then the Nelson Mandela show when he came to Wembley and spoke and various people played. And the Wall in Berlin, which Roger Waters did when the wall had just come down, played in no man's land between what was East and West Berlin.
Big moments in history.
Yeah, but the second Mandela show, when he came, I was like the artist stage manager. There were lots and lots of people on the bill. Lou Reed, Neil Young, Peter Gabriel, Simple Minds, God knows who else. And a friend of mine, David Russell, American, who's sadly dead now, died of cancer a few years ago, was the production manager. And and there was a stage manager and there was an artist stage manager, which is me. So I got a lot of people who were tour managers to be the responsible adult on duty with whoever they were with. So everybody was on radios, and I knew where everybody was, because it was being broadcast live, and you can't have an empty stage. So there was a point where there were various South African artists, Hugh Masekela and a few other people, some of whom had actually been in jail or had fallen down the steps in a police station or anything like that. And they were all backstage, and this is in the old Wembley, where the dressing room area, it was the other side of the concourse, which ran right the way around the stadium. And somebody got on the radio and said, Nelson's going down to the stage area. And I realised that if I didn't get them on the side of the stage now, even though it was quite early, I'd never get them on side of the stage in time. Right. So I got the people who were working with them to bring them up early.
So Hugh Masekela and the like.
Yeah, Hugh Masekela. And so that when he got backstage, they wouldn't be there. Right. And I felt very bad about that, because that would have been a big moment for them.
Yeah, yeah.
But no, I don't think anybody ever realised. But I did actually feel, but it was like, it would have been very, very difficult otherwise. Course, so, and I'm sure there's been other occasions, but I can't think of anything offhand.
Have you ever had to stop a show halfway through?
I've had shows stopped by the artist halfway through. Right. If there's been trouble in the audience or on a with madness.
There's this thing called show stop, isn't there?
Oh, yeah. Well, that's something which has happened in the last, 15, 20 years, which didn't happen beforehand. Health and safety has got quite different. I mean, security has got quite different. Security in the 70s and 80s. I remember going to Australia with Spandau Ballet, and all the security in the pit had mag-light torches, which were this long. Right. Now, that's not so you can see where you're going. No. That's because you can use it as a weapon. Yeah. And, they had an audience of sort of screaming girls, basically. So, I mean, Yeah, I've never really stopped a show. Sorry, I've completely lost the thread of what you asked.
No,
me
I'm just really interested. We're talking about responsibility, and I know there's a thing called showstop. If you've ever had to call it off.
No, but it is something now that you have a security meeting and there is one person on the stage who the band knows that if they're walking on the stage, something has gone wrong.
Right.
Because there's been things like Guns N' Roses at Donington and Pearl Jam at Roskilde and things like that where you don't know what's happened in the audience and you can't, and even now it happens. Look at last year Travis Scott in
Terrible,
Dallas, Las Vegas? Can't remember.
I don't remember the location. I remember the gig though. Awful.
Yeah.
And so this is a bit of a technical question actually, but I'm going to throw the floor open to questions in a moment. But I'm just really interested. So that one person is there on stage. They're wired to security, and basically if something's not going well, they're told just to walk onto the stage.
Well, there will come somebody. I mean, if something was happening in the audience, I guess the promoter would come to the production office or would come and find me and we'd go up together. I mean, it sort of depends what's going on. If it's just something happening at the back or if it's something, if you've got to stop the show. A lot of artists will see what's going on.
And they've become much better at that, haven't they, recently?
Yes, absolutely, because nobody wants to be the person who had people die at a show.
Of course not.
So yeah, I mean, on Spandau Ballet, for instance, it was the stage manager, Danny Spratt, who was there, who would stand by the monitor desk, and he would be told if we had stopped. We never had to. But, there is a designated person. It can't be one person or another. It's got to be one person.
It's interesting. I find it fascinating, actually. I find it really interesting. Final question from me before we open the floor open. It seems to me that when we read rock and roll stories from the 70s and 80s, it was much more rock and roll than it is in 2023. I mean, we don't hear about televisions being thrown out of hotel windows and all that anymore. So has it got a lot tamer, do you think?
It's got a lot more grown up, probably.
Has it?
Maybe.
Yeah. Corporate,
I'm sure
maybe?
Yeah, definitely corporate. I mean, it's sort of, I'm sure somebody somewhere is contemplating throwing a TV out the window.
One of you want...
No, but there was I remember somebody, I can't remember who it was, it might have been on a Boomtown Rats tour where the road crew tried to throw a TV out of the window and it was bolted to the floor, so there was a lot of people straining going, this thing's really heavy,
I don't know why it became a thing, throwing the television out of hotel windows.
It was a sort of Who smashing up hotel rooms.
Right.
And there's a famous bit of footage from a movie about the Rolling Stones, which has never been officially released.
Right.
Where Bobby Keys and Keith Richards throw a TV drop it into a car park. Right. It makes a very satisfying bang.
Okay.
But yeah, it has probably got tamer. I think it became more professional. There was a point at the end of the 70s and the beginning of the 80s where the money got more. And as soon as there was more money around, people realised, managers and artists and business managers and everybody, I'm sure that people behave quite badly, but maybe more privately.
Yeah. Which is odd in this world of social media. You think there'd be more evidence, really, but...
Well, yeah, that's the other thing. There is. Yeah. I did a tour last year, which I don't really want to talk about. It wasn't a very happy experience. And seriously, people were told, no selfies, no shots on stage, really? You take your phone out, take a yeah.
That's strict.
That's strict.
Wow.
Now that wasn't because they were the hugest band in the world. They just didn't like it.
Right.
Didn't want photographs taken.
Okay.
And there are other tours where you don't, Rolling Stones tours, which are probably incredibly sedate now compared to what they were in the 70s. I know people who, a friend of mine, Louis Soto, worked for them, I don't know, about 8 or 9 years ago, and I'd worked with him. He'd I'd worked even on a tour with an American artist called Maxwell, and he'd been Maxwell's assistant. He became road manager for the Rolling Stones. He'd worked for a few other bands in between. And I had no idea who was on it. I follow him on Instagram, and I had no idea. You never saw a photograph.
Really?
Yeah. Never saw it, not even a photograph standing outside a hotel or anything.
That is incredible. So this thing about managing social media is becoming quite a big thing, I think.
Yeah.
Reputational management. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Right, I'm going to shut up now because it's your turn. So if you have any questions, please just raise your hand. We've got the wandering mic here, so we'll bring it over to you and we'll take your question.
Any questions from anybody? No
Just behind you there, look. There we go.
Hiya. I was just wondering, what would you say the importance of a nice touring vehicle is for a band?
The importance of it?
As in...
like a tour bus.
Like a tour
going
bus.
on a long tour.
I mean, for a band, they'll probably spend more time in a hotel than a crew, but for everybody, it becomes home. So it is very important, and for the crew particularly, because you'll load in the morning, you'll do a show, you'll get on the bus, you'll drive overnight to the next city, you'll have a hotel on the days off, but the rest of the time, that's where you live. Yeah. So it's very important. And I've been on some really great tour buses, and I've been on some absolutely dreadful ones, where literally you're driving up the M1, and you suddenly realise that there's a leak, and it's pouring with rain or whatever, and it's all leaking through into somebody's bunk. So, yeah, I mean, yeah, it's very important.
Cool.
The same way that it's very important when you have a day off that, lots of people try to twin people in the crew up to save money, which is fine. But seriously, when you've got a day off, you don't necessarily want to see any of these people.
No.
It's not because you hate them, it's just, you need a bit of time on your own.
I think that's the problem with it, isn't it? Because if you're on a tour with a band or a crew, there is no day when you're more than 5 metres away from them.
Yeah.
So,
sometimes you definitely want to be 5 minutes away from them.
Can build up.
Yeah.
And those tour buses, I've been on a few, not for very long, thankfully, but you get to know people well on those, don't you?
Oh, yes. Yes, yeah. People snoring, yeah, all that sort of thing, yeah. But actually, the funny thing is, one thing that you haven't mentioned, and I don't want to talk to, but there's much more focus now on mental health.
I was coming on to that, yeah.
Which is partly because we're all self-employed, one-man or woman businesses. So if you're out of work, you have to, it's like, will I ever get another job again? It's that sort of thing. So there is one particular thing online. There's a thing called the Back Lounge, which was started by a lady called Susie Green, who's a tour manager. And she started it during COVID because people were at a loose end, people who are not constantly on the road, but move from one tour to another, and all of a sudden you're sitting at home with nothing to do. And the Back Lounge is quite an important place. That's where people do congregate, to
socialise.
Socialise and tell stories and exaggerate and lie and whatever. But it's a place where people do tend to be quite honest as the evening gets on and there's less and less people there.
Right.
So.
And we'll stick with the mental. Thank you. Did you want to? Sorry, I want to make sure you've asked your question fully. Go on.
Have I got time for a question to sort of add to that?
Yeah, of course. Of course.
In terms of a schedule for a tour, what is the importance, would you say, of no gigs for 1 or 2 days in the week?
I think that depends on venue availability, but I think it's important. I think it's to have a day off. If you're, it depends what size venue you're playing. What size venues you're playing. It depends when they're available, but it is important to have days off. It's important to have time where you're not having to if you're on the crew, you're not having to get up at 7:30 in the morning or 8 o'clock, and you're not going to bed at 2 o'clock. I mean, a lot of touring is done with not enough sleep.
Yeah,
but as a tour manager or as crew members, I mean, when you think about an arena tour, probably the production manager and the tour rigger will be in the venue at 7:30 in the morning. And they'll leave, or the production manager will leave at 1 or 2 o'clock the following morning. So, you know, I mean, there is the opportunity to have a kip in the afternoon maybe, but basically it's, you know, it's hard work. And it's adrenaline, and if you enjoy it, you know, you can do 2 or 3 shows on the trot. But the other thing is people's voices don't hold up. I mean, you know, and so after a while, there's lots of bands who can't, you know, singers can't do more than 3 shows, or even 2 shows sometimes. You know.
Cool, thank you.
You mentioned more questions in a second. You mentioned mental health there, and for the tour manager, but also I imagine if an artist, whether a solo artist or a part of a band, is on a prolonged tour around the world, I mean, there could be all sorts of mental health issues associated with homesickness and other things, can't there?
Yeah, there's homesickness, there's pressure from home. I mean, I suppose, without going into too many lurid details, I mean, that's, you know, Michael Hutchins is a prime example of somebody who was sort of self-medicating, I guess, quite a lot. I mean, not enough that, you know, like I say, nobody quite expected what happened was going to happen. But yeah, there was drinking, not falling down, wetting yourself drinking, but there was some drinking going on
An
stage.
attempt to numb the mind.
Yes, and there were certainly occasions when, you know, I went to a doctor. I got an appointment through the hotel for a doctor so he could get Prozac or something, because there was a lot of pressure with the whole Paula Yates, Bob Geldof custody battle thing going on.
And being away from home exacerbates that, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Right. More questions from you, please. Oh, one there, one here. Thank you. I've seen you. Thank you.
Hey. So, with the advent of that Travis Scott incident, which was Astroworld, I think, in Las Vegas. Have you ever had to stop a tour or a show because someone's genuinely, to put it mildly, going to get killed here?
No, I'm glad to say I haven't. But, and I mean, part of that, it's not, you know, I'm not. Part of that is because more and more now, a lot of work goes into making sure that's not likely to happen. I mean, when I think of what festivals were like in the 70s or shows were like in the 70s, 80s, it's unbelievable more people didn't get killed. I mean, that's a dreadful thing to say, but it's a fact.
There was no health and safety, was there?
No health and safety at all. I mean, you know, where now it's taken very seriously. And I think it's only... Yeah, I mean, the Travis Scott thing, there was some quite well-known footage of somebody trying to get one of the camera operators to stop the show.
I think there was, in fact, they tried to get an ambulance in and the crowd just wasn't letting it happen as well.
Yeah. I mean, it's just, you know, there's... The artist and the people who work for the artist have to bear some responsibility for that, I'm afraid. You know? You're responsible to the artist, but you also, what you want to do when you do a show, and not just the tour manager, but the people on the tour, is everybody to come enjoy it and go home happy, you know. So yeah, people are much more careful now, and there's more regulation, and there's people who really understand crowd control and stuff like that. Whereas in the old days, it was, you know, like I say, I'm surprised that there weren't more accidents.
That's brilliant, thanks.
Thank you very much indeed. We've got another question down the front here, please, if that's okay.
Yes. So a bit of a two-part question. So first off, was there any sort of bands or artists that you was like asked to do the tour managing for where you was like, couldn't pay me enough? Absolutely not. And secondly, was there any sort of like artists that you might have had a chance with or sort of wanted to but just didn't get the opportunity to? And
well, I'm not sure I want to answer the first question because if I'm really short of work, I wouldn't say. There are probably a few people who, by reputation, you would be very wary of doing it.
Yeah.
Because, yeah, yeah, there are probably some people, I'm not going to mention them. There was one thing that I missed out on, and it's one of those moments where something happens and you just hesitate. You just think, how am I going to make this work? So anyway, I was working for an American artist called Raphael Sadiq, who's an R&B soul artist, managed by Irving Azoff, who manages the Eagles, and Irving Azoff and a guy called Damian Smith, who manages the Eagles, and all sorts of people. A company called Full Stop Management. They also managed Mark Ronson and Harry Styles, and So this was in 2012, and he was the musical director for the Soul Train Music Awards, which were happening in Las Vegas. And there was Mary J. Blige and Stevie Wonder and various people. And it was he put together a band with strings and brass and musicians who were going to back everybody. And there was quite a complicated rehearsal schedule because, of course, nobody was available when we really needed them. And I'd done all that from working from home in England. I'd put all that together. And I was due to fly to Los Angeles on a Wednesday. On a Tuesday morning at about 9:15, the phone rang, and it was a guy called Paul Dainty, who's an Australian promoter, who had, with the backing of, I think, Richard Branson, with some money, was promoting the 7 or 8 shows that the Rolling Stones did for their 50th anniversary. There were 2 shows at the O2, I think, and then 3 shows in New York at the Barclays Center in Brooklyn, something like that. Anyway, and he actually said to me, and I knew he was doing it, and he said, "Hi, what are you up to?" And I said, "Well, I'm, going to Las Vegas." He said, "Could you go to Paris today? Because that's where they were rehearsing. Just get on the Eurostar and go, because the tour accountant's there on his own, and it's like there's cars and there's, it's just nobody. We need somebody to go there." And for me, this is the dream job. Yeah. I mean, not only because I like them and I grew up listening to them, but also because they invented a lot of what people do these days. They were the first band to take their own PA on the road. They were the first band to take lights on the road. They were the first band in 1969 and then 1972. Now, 1969, bit of a problem with the audience there. Somebody got killed at a free concert. But they invented a lot of what arena touring became. And flying, if you see footage of them in the early 70s, you'll see that the PA is flown out of the roof using sort of packing pallets and rope. But they realised that if you fly the PA out of the roof, you can sell more seats. Because you can sell more seats because more people can see. So it was a dream job for me, but I sort of felt that I couldn't just go. So I said, just give me an hour. So I phoned somebody in LA I knew and said, could you do this for me? If I send you all the stuff, I'll email it to you. And in that hour, somebody else got the job. So that's, and if I'd have said yes and then worked out how I was going to do it, but I just thought, I just hesitated for that moment rather than just going, yeah, of course I can. And then thinking, oh, fuck, how am I going to make this work? It would have been much better. But anyway, as it happened, Paul Dainty, they then decided to do a tour, but because they were all getting on a bit, they only did 8. Paul Dainty was doing it in conjunction with Richard Branson. Richard Branson had some venture capitalists involved because obviously he wouldn't want to spend any of his own money. And they were only going to do 18 shows because they weren't sure whether they wanted to go on the road anymore because they were all getting on a bit. So he lost it, and if he'd have lost it, I wouldn't have done it anyway because I'd have been his guy. Yeah. So,
Thanks.
Yeah. Great questions. Thank you. Oh, and just next door, please. And I see a hand over there as well. I've got you. Thank you.
Hi. I've got kind of like a 2-part question as well. Part 1 is mainly about how do you manage the expectations from the label and what the label want from the artists while on tour, and then part 2 is what do you think the outcome of creativity when it comes to music creation is like on tour? Is it better in the studios, or do better songs in your opinion come from being on tour?
Well, managing what the label want is sort of, I work for the band, so, you know, there will be times when you go, we're not going to do this interview, they're not going to do this. You know, it's the, oh, can we just do this interview 10 minutes before the band go on stage? Some people will do that. Some people like to be distracted before they go on stage. Other people, I think it's important, I mean, again, I'll use Spandau Ballet as an example on the last tour. They weren't getting on particularly well. I mean, there was a lot of trouble on the INXS tour, but they were still a band that, you know, they still had a bond. Spandau Ballet, there was at least one person who was doing it for the money. And it was a little bit tense at times. And we made it, talking to the manager, we made it a sort of rule that for the hour before they went on stage, they'd be sort of left on their own. And inevitably, with just them in the dressing room, they would feel like a band again, because there wouldn't be people coming in and asking them to do things or whatever. And you'd get a little bit, sometimes they'd just not talk to each other, but other times I'd go in to get them when they were due to go on stage and they'd all be laughing about something that happened 20, 25 years ago. So you manage, you know, you get them to do as much as as they are prepared to do for the label. But I don't work for the label, I work for the artist. And the other question, which I've now forgotten, creativity. Well, I mean, some people go into the studio straight after they've been on tour. And that's a bigger question, because it's all about digital technology. We were talking about this when I got here, about the fact that now, we were talking about, it's a bit of a digression, Kemper, the guitar amps, where I remember having an argument with a roadie for Slaves when we were supporting Kasabian a few years ago, when he was going, this is brilliant, you can just plug it in and you can sound like Jimi Hendrix, or you can sound like, and it's like, yeah, but what's original about that? I mean, I think I'm a bit old-fashioned. I think songs are written by two people bunking off school in the afternoon and sitting in the front room with two acoustic guitars. That's how I think songs are written, by people who are locked in the kitchen and told, don't come out until you've written a song. I don't think, yes, digital technology is great, but I think, and you know, there's a lot of great stuff which is done entirely with electronics and great dance music and stuff like that, but I think there's enough going on. I think, but there again, I know people have written on to. I can think of bands, REM are an example, who I've never worked with, but who wrote an entire album and recorded it during sound checks. So it just depends on the band, I guess.
Cool, thank you.
There's someone at the back there, please. Oh, in fact, two. There's one there, one there. I, not wanting to drop a name, Crash, interviewed Michael Stipe once from REM, and he confided in me that he can't bear to finish a tour, that when a tour finishes, he can't bear to be home. He has to go and find another band who are on tour and hang around with them and gently win himself off. Is that quite a common thing?
Yeah, I know. I've got a couple of friends who, and this might have been a good thing for me to do, but I've got a couple of friends who made it a rule that they would tell their wives or partners, I'll be home on the 29th, and they'd actually get to London on the 27th and just go to a hotel and just get their head out of tour mode.
Decompress.
Yeah, because they're going home to the kids. I mean, you know, you fly back to England up the pointy end of the plane, and you get home, and the first thing you're asked to do is take the rubbish out. You know, it's all a bit disconcerting, probably.
No, I get that. Right, question, please.
Yeah, my question kind of relates to that, sort of how do you cope with any post-tour blues or burnout?
I think you have to be extremely resilient and have a lot of self-belief, and you have to believe that the next job is coming along. I mean, and sometimes you just actually want to go home and just sleep for a couple of days, you know, because you've had enough, you know. However great a tour is, sometimes you just, you know, you've done enough of it. So I think everybody's different. Everybody is different. I know people who hate it when they're not on tour, you know. But I mean, you know, once the tour's over, it's over. It's sad because there's people that you're friends with that you're not going to see again for a while. But then if you've got family, you know, you want to get home. So,
what was the longest sort of time you were not, like the longest gap between two tours was?
Probably, I think probably before the first and second tour, but the end of the Boomtown Rats tour that I did, which ended in June of 1980, and I started working for Echo and the Bunnymen in January of 1981, because I'd only done one tour. So it was, you know, there was a big thing about, you know, it wasn't like I could go and say, well, I've done this, 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 and I'd get hired. And I was literally hired by somebody because they didn't know any better.
So you got no reputation back then?
No, and you're only as good as your last tour.
Yeah.
It's all about reputation.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I
and it's a dog-eat-dog world. And, you know,
it?
there are lots of, you don't want to work with him. Oh, you don't want to work with him. Oh, no, you know, yeah.
No wonder they need that backroom place, that website.
Pardon?
The website.
No, not the back lounge. But
the back lounge. That's why they need it.
But that's more mental health and having people getting people to talk to each other on Zoom during the COVID.
Right.
No, but yeah, there's lots of people who are prepared to slag you off to
Wow.
get a job.
Oh, I don't like that. It's harsh. Right, another question over the other side there, please. How are we doing for time, John? Are we all right? 20 past. 10 minutes, thank you. Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
What are some of the, or your advice on some of the creative ways to market yourself as a tour manager?
Well, I don't, I guess, because I'm a bit... I think it is just reputation. I mean, lots of people have websites and are constantly posting on LinkedIn and stuff like that. But I mean, I know a lot of people in the music industry, so if I'm not working, I'll let them know I'm looking for a job. Or somebody will be looking for a tour manager and they'll go, you know, I sort of think the fancy website where you know you talk about what you can do, but you don't talk about what you've actually done, doesn't really work. So it's just reputation and word of mouth. For me, that's not to say you shouldn't do it a different way. I mean, there are people now who've got production companies and tour management companies who have websites who are extremely good, you know, but that doesn't work for me. I've been doing this so long, it's just people I know and management companies I know, and, you know. Sorry, that's not much of an answer, I'm afraid.
No, I think you answered it. I think there's a supplementary coming in there.
Yeah.
Sorry,
I've seen it.
Last question. How much would a tour manager get paid?
Ooh, that rather depends. I
mean, for a lot of the time, it's nothing, isn't it, when you're not working?
Well, I believe you get paid from the moment you start prepping the tour. You get paid for advancing it. You won't get paid the same as you get for advancing it as you do that you going on the road. You can be paid, I mean, you know, if you're playing clubs with your mates who've just got a record deal, you'll get maybe 100 quid a day, 150, 200 quid a day. Some record companies who give bands tour support started to specify that you can only pay the crew a certain amount of money, which is fine. You know, they're giving the band money to go on tour. But if you're only paying somebody 100 quid and then you go to the London show and he's constantly handing somebody an out-of-tune guitar, that's why, because you're only paying him 100 quid and he's fucking useless. You know, so I think you can, it depends. I know other people that get paid $1,000 a day, but they work for it. So, you know, it just depends. It depends on the budget. It depends how much they're earning. There is no set amount of money. But, yeah, you know.
Yeah, just down the front here, please, while the mic's coming down. You mentioned that it can be a little bit, people can pull the rug out from under your feet, but do you have allies, people that will give you the work? If they're already booked and a job comes in, somebody might say, I'll give it to John instead.
I've got friends, I've got 2 or 3 friends who are tour managers who we've swapped. I mean, when I was doing Mark Ronson, there were a couple of things I couldn't do, and I have a friend called Chris Griffiths who's a tour manager who lives in Manchester, so I got him to cover those shows. There is that sort of thing.
There's a bit of teamwork in there.
Yeah, of course there is. But there are also people who will just to get a job and not just me, anybody.
Oh, no.
It's just it depends. Yeah. And those people are usually not very good at what they do.
Oh.
Sorry.
Spencer.
Hi, Dean. Hi, John.
Hi.
I've got 2 very quick questions, but the first 2-part, The first part is, so the budget has been presented.
Yeah.
And the tour manager's role is to look fastidiously and attention to detail to every single penny that's spent on that budget. Is that correct?
Yes.
Everything.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you put a budget together. You look at ways of travelling, hotels, what the production's going to cost, and then the idea is to stick to it. Because presumably the budget is that you've put a budget together where the band are making some money. So then now sometimes on a big tour you'll have a tour accountant. Other times the tour manager will be the tour accountant as well as the tour manager. But on a big tour it's worth having a tour accountant because because there's a lot of financial stuff to deal with when you're also dealing with, I've lost my luggage, I don't like the colour of the wallpaper in my room, or whatever that is. But you're settling an arena show, there's a lot of costs, and you have to go through all of them. And every promoter is at it. Every promoter has a scam where they are taking money that the band, there's a famous occasion with a promoter who still works, so I'm not going to mention his name, in the 70s, who had a deal with Hammersmith Odeon, as it was then, to if he puts 100 shows in there during the course of the year, the rental, and I can't remember, I'm pretty sure I've got the figures right, the rental would go down from £27,500 to £25,000. So that's £2,500 for 100 shows is £250,000 that he's saving, that nobody knows about. And he only got caught out because somebody either sent a fax or, no, it wouldn't have been a fax or a telex. Anyway, people found out about it and people were very, very, because basically, he's making money. If that's money that's not going to be spent on the show, that should be split between the artist and the promoter, depending on what the percentage deal is. So, yeah, you're responsible. There is a thing about. I've worked with a lot of bands who you do a budget and you sit down with the manager and the band, and then the moment you go out, it's like, well, I need a car to take me here, and I need and all of a sudden they're spending a lot of their own money. So there is a financial responsibility.
Okay, thank you. Just one quick one.
Yeah, of course.
Are you finding, or are you seeing that more female tour managers are now coming into the business?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I can think of 3 people. There's a Rebecca Travis who's worked with, Florence and the Machine, Susie Green, who I mentioned, who's doing Grace Jones, and did PJ Harvey, and Emma Edgar, who's out on My Chemical Romance at the moment. The business has changed from what it was in the 70s so that, a lot of female tour managers are a lot better organised than male tour managers. And some artists would prefer to have a female tour manager because they don't want that sort of testosterone-fueled competition between crew members or production managers and tour managers. The best example I can give you is there's a girl called Maggie Mitsakoutis. I can't remember how to pronounce her name. She was Oasis's tour manager right from the beginning until the moment that Liam smashed Noel's guitar up. Now that is a tough job, and she was brilliant at it through all of that. You know, and it was definitely no doubt at the beach. But she was their tour manager all the way through.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, Spencer. Thank you all for your amazing questions. Thanks for listening so attentively. And above all, a big thank you to John Martin.